Captain Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of the exploration ship Endeavour, watching the stars through the wide viewing window. 3 months into their mission to map the outer systems, her crew had found nothing but empty space and dead rocks. That was about to change in a way that would shake the entire galaxy. The communication officer, Lieutenant Park, suddenly looked up from his station. His face had gone pale. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission. It's not from Earth." Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. First contact. After decades of searching the stars, humanity had finally found someone else out there. She tried to keep her voice steady. "Put it through, Lieutenant." The main screen flickered and then showed something that made several crew members gasp. The alien was tall and thin, with blue-gray skin that seemed to shimmer. Its eyes were large and dark, and when it spoke, its voice came through the translator with a cold, mechanical tone. "I am War Leader Zexthel of the Kethver Hegemony. You will listen carefully, primitive beings of the third planet. We know of your kind. We have watched your pathetic attempts to reach the stars. Your expansion ends now." Sarah stepped forward, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. "This is Captain Sarah Chun of the United Earth Colony's ship Endeavour. We come in peace and seek friendship with other species." The alien's face twisted into what might have been a smile, but there was no warmth in it. "Peace? Friendship? How?" "Amusing. Your species is young and foolish. You do not understand your place in the order of things." Behind Zexthel, Sarah could see parts of what looked like a massive ship. The walls were covered in strange symbols, and other aliens moved in the background. Some looked like the war leader, while others were completely different. One looked like a walking tree, another seemed to be made of living metal. "The Kethver hegemony has ruled this galaxy for 10,000 of your years," Zexthel continued. "We have brought order to chaos, peace through strength. 12 great species follow our guidance. Hundreds of lesser races serve us willingly, having learned the wisdom of submission." "We're not interested in submitting to anyone," Sarah said firmly. "Humanity values freedom and independence." Zexel's dark eyes seemed to focus on her with something like amusement. "Freedom? Independence? These are the words of children who have not yet learned that the universe is vast and cruel. Your kind numbers barely 8 billion on one small world, with 3 tiny colonies containing a few thousand more. We command thousands of worlds and trillions of beings." The alien gestured, and the screen split to show images that made Sarah's blood run cold. Massive fleets of ships, each one larger than any vessel humanity had ever built. Cities that stretched across entire continents on worlds she couldn't even imagine. Beings of every shape and size, all bearing the same symbol that decorated Zexthel's uniform. "This is the reality of power, human," the war leader said. "We could crush your entire species without effort. Your ships are toys. Your weapons are barely worthy of the name. Your technology is primitive compared to our least advanced servants." Sarah's communications officer was frantically trying to record everything, while her science officer attempted to analyze the alien technology they were seeing. She knew this information would be vital, but she also knew she had to respond carefully. The wrong words could doom her entire species. "What do you want from us?" she asked. "Wisdom," Zexthel replied. "We offer you what we have offered every species we have encountered. Submit to our guidance. Accept our protection. Allow us to relocate your population to worlds where you can live simple, peaceful lives under our care. In return, we will ensure your survival. And if we refuse?" The alien's expression didn't change, but something cold entered his voice. "Then you will be eliminated. Not out of cruelty, you understand, but out of necessity. History has taught the U.S. that aggressive species, if left unchecked, become problems. Better to remove the problem before it grows." Sarah felt anger rising in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. "You're talking about genocide." "We prefer to call it prevention," Zexthel said. "In our long experience, species like yours always choose war over wisdom. You are young, violent, and unpredictable. You have spent your entire history fighting each other. Left alone, you would eventually threaten the peace we have built. We've learned from our mistakes, Sarah protested. Humanity has united. We've put aside our differences to reach for the stars together. So say all the young races, the war leader replied with what sounded like boredom. Yet scratch the surface and the old hatreds remain. We have seen it countless times. The pattern never changes. He leaned forward and his image filled the screen. We are not cruel, human. We offer you 30 of your days to consider our terms. Gather your leaders. Show them these images. Let them understand the choice before them. Submit willingly, and your people will live. Continue this foolish dream of independence, and your species will become another footnote in the history of this galaxy. Our leaders will never agree to slavery, Sarah said. Then they will choose extinction, Zexthel replied without emotion. The choice is yours to make. We have waited 10,000 years to bring order to the galaxy. We can wait 30 more days for your answer. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the bridge of the Endeavor in stunned silence. Sarah stared at the empty screen, her mind racing. Everything had changed in the space of a few minutes. Humanity was no longer alone in the universe, but their first contact had been a death sentence. Lieutenant Park, she said finally, set course for Earth, maximum speed. Yes, ma'am, Park replied, his hands shaking slightly as he input the coordinates. Commander Wells, Sarah called to her second-in-command, I need you to prepare a complete report of this encounter. Every word, every image, every detail. The Council needs to see everything. Captain, her science officer spoke up, I've been analyzing the technology we observed. Their ships appear to be using some kind of space-folding drive system. Their weapon signatures suggest energy output levels far beyond anything we've achieved. And the number of different species we saw ... How many? Sarah asked. At least 8 distinct types in the background of their transmission alone. If they're telling the truth about controlling 12 species and hundreds of others, we're looking at a galactic empire of unimaginable size. Sarah nodded grimly. She walked to the viewing window and looked out at the stars that had seemed so full of promise just minutes before. Now they felt hostile, filled with enemies humanity had never imagined. Captain, Commander Wells approached her quietly. What do you think Earth will decide? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. She thought about the history lessons she'd learned in school, about the wars and struggles that had shaped humanity. She thought about the men and women who had died to defend their freedom, who had refused to submit even when facing impossible odds. I think, she said finally, that Zexthel doesn't understand humanity as well as he thinks he does. He sees our history of war as a weakness. But maybe he should have looked more carefully at who usually won those wars. Commander Wells frowned. Ma'am? The ones who were willing to fight for their freedom, Sarah explained. No matter what the odds, no matter what the cost. Humanity has never been good at backing down from bullies, Commander. Even when the smart thing to do is surrender. As the Endeavor jumped to faster-than-light speed, carrying news that would change the fate of the human race, Sarah couldn't help but think that war leader Zexthel had made one critical error in his calculations. He had studied human technology and counted human ships. He had measured human weapons and mapped human colonies, but he had never really studied human history. And that, Sarah suspected, was going to be his first and last mistake. Dr. Elena Vasquez had spent her entire career studying war. Not the glory of it, not the politics behind it, but the cold, hard facts of how humans had killed each other for thousands of years. She knew about every major battle, every successful strategy, every brilliant commander who had ever lived. Today, for the first time in her life, she wished she had chosen a different profession. The emergency meeting of the United Colonies Council had been going for 6 hours. President Martinez sat at the head of the long table, looking older than his 58 years. Around him, the most powerful people in human space argued and shouted and pointed fingers. Admiral Reeves kept insisting they could fight. Secretary Chun kept saying they should negotiate. Dr. Tanaka, the chief strategist, just stared at the reports from the Endeavor with a look of hopeless calculation. The numbers don't lie, Dr. Tanaka was saying for the 10th time. We have 12 ships. Capable of interstellar combat, they have thousands. We control 4 worlds. They control thousands. Our total population is 8 billion. Theirs is in the trillions. This isn't a war we can win through conventional means. So we just give up? Admiral Reeves slammed his hand on the table. We just roll over and let them relocate us to whatever prison planet they've picked out? What choice do we have? Secretary Chun shot back. You heard the recording. You saw their ships. We might as well fight the sun for all the good our weapons will do. President Martinez rubbed his temples. Dr. Vasquez, you've been quiet. What's your professional opinion? Elena looked up from the datapad where she'd been taking notes. She had been thinking about something the alien leader had said, something that bothered her more than all the threats and displays of power. He called us predictable, she said finally. The room fell silent. I'm sorry? President Martinez asked. War leader Zextel. He said we were like all the other young races, that we follow the same pattern. That history has taught them what to expect from species like us. Elena stood up and walked to the large screen that showed the star maps of human space. But what if he's wrong? What if we're not like the others? Explain, Dr. Tanaka said, leaning forward. Elena touched the screen, and it changed to show a timeline of human history. Battles and wars stretch back thousands of years. Every species they've conquered has probably been unified. Single governments, single military traditions, predictable responses to threats. But humans. We've never been unified until very recently. We spent our entire existence fighting each other. How does that help us? Admiral Reeves asked. Because we've learned from every possible type of warfare, Elena replied, her excitement growing. Naval battles and land campaigns, guerrilla warfare and siege tactics, ancient formations and modern strategy. We've tried everything, analyzed everything, perfected everything. The hegemony may have superior technology, but do they have superior knowledge? Dr. Tanaka was nodding slowly. You're talking about asymmetric warfare, using their expectations against them. I'm talking about 10,000 years of human military innovation, Elena said. Sun Tzu and Alexander the Great, Hannibal and Napoleon, Shaka Zulu and Genghis Khan, Rommel and Patton. We have the greatest military minds in history to learn. Does the hegemony? President Martinez looked intrigued. What are you proposing, Doctor? Operation Precedent, Elena said without hesitation. We gather every military historian, every strategist, every tactical expert we have. We feed them everything we know about the hegemony. And we figure out how to apply 10,000 years of human warfare to a galactic conflict. That's insane, Secretary Chun said. You're talking about using ancient tactics against space-age technology. No, Elena replied firmly. I'm talking about using proven principles of warfare that transcend technology. The Mongols conquered half the world not because they had better weapons, but because they understood speed and psychological warfare. The Vietnamese defeated the most powerful military in the world using tunnels and patience. David killed Goliath with a rock. Admiral Reeves was studying the timeline on the screen. How long would this take? We have 30 days, Elena said. If we start immediately, if we mobilize every resource we have, we might be able to develop a comprehensive strategy based on historical precedent. And if we're wrong? President Martinez asked quietly. If this doesn't work, Elena met his eyes, then we die fighting instead of living in cages. But at least we'll have tried something they've never seen before. The vote was closer than Elena had hoped, but Operation Precedent was approved. Within hours, historians and military experts from across human space were being contacted. Universities opened their archives. Military academies shared their case studies. Even retired generals and amateur history buffs found themselves recruited for the most important project in human history. Meanwhile, the hegemony was not waiting idly. 3 days after the ultimatum, long-range sensors detected massive ships approaching the outer colonies. War leader Zextel was sending what he called encouragement fleets to help humanity make the right decision. The first target was New Geneva, a mining colony of 8,000 people on the edge of human space. Governor Lisa Park received the evacuation order from Earth, but her response surprised everyone who knew her. "No," she said simply during the emergency council meeting. "We're not running." "Governor, you can't be serious," her deputy administrator protested. "They'll be here in 5 days. We have no military ships, no weapons capable of fighting them." "We have something better," Governor Park replied. She had been one of the first people to receive Dr. Vasquez's preliminary research files. "We have history." Over the next 4 days, New Geneva transformed. The 8,000 colonists worked around the clock, but they weren't building weapons or ships. They were building traps. Dr. Sarah Kim, a historian specializing in siege warfare, had arrived on the second day with a team of tactical experts. They studied the colony's layout, the approaching enemy fleet, and the terrain of the asteroid field where New Geneva was located. Then they started applying lessons learned from every defensive battle in human history. "The asteroid field is our terrain advantage," Dr. Kim explained to the colonists. "We're going to turn it into the Thermopylae of space. They have superior numbers and technology, but they have to come to us through a narrow approach corridor." The colonists hollowed out asteroids and filled them with explosives, using techniques adapted from the tunnel networks of Vietnam and the hidden bunkers of World War II. They created false settlements to draw enemy fire away from the real colony. They even painted some asteroids to look like ships, hoping to confuse enemy sensors. Most importantly, they prepared for a siege. Every colonist was assigned a role based on successful resistance movements throughout history. Some would be fighters. Others would be saboteurs. Still others would be intelligence gatherers. Governor Park had studied the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising and the Siege of Leningrad. She knew that the key to surviving overwhelming odds was to make the enemy pay a price they weren't prepared to pay. When the hegemony fleet arrived, it consisted of 30 ships, each one larger and more advanced than anything humanity had ever built. The fleet commander, a Kethver named Moltar, expected quick surrender followed by efficient relocation of the human population. Instead, he found something that confused him greatly. The colonists were not trying to flee. They were not begging for mercy. They were not even trying to communicate. They were just ... Moltar ordered his ships to take positions around the colony and broadcast the standard surrender demand. The response came not from Governor Park, but from Dr. Kim, who had studied the psychological warfare tactics of ancient Sparta. "Come and take it," she said simply. What happened next would be analyzed by military historians for centuries to come. The hegemony ships moved in to capture the colony, expecting minimal resistance. Instead, they found themselves flying through a carefully planned killing field. The first ship to enter the asteroid field hit a mine disguised as space debris. The explosion damaged its engines and sent it drifting into a second trap. When other ships moved to assist, they triggered more traps, each one designed using principles learned from the most successful ambush in human history. The colonists fought like cornered animals, but they fought smart. They used hit-and-run tactics borrowed from Native American warfare. They employed feints and diversions learned from medieval siege defense. They even used psychological warfare, broadcasting historical accounts of human atrocities to demoralize the enemy. By the time Moltar realized what was happening, he had lost 8 ships and hundreds of crew members to a force that should have been helpless. The humans weren't fighting like any enemy the hegemony had ever encountered. They were fighting like they had nothing to lose and everything to prove. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, the hegemony fleet had taken the colony, but at a cost that shocked everyone involved. 15 ships destroyed or damaged. Nearly 1,000 alien casualties. All to capture 8,000 humans who should have surrendered without a fight. When war leader Zexthel received Moltar's report, he stared at it for a long time without speaking. Finally, he called his staff together. "Send word to all fleet commanders," he said slowly. "These humans, they may be more dangerous War leader Zexthal stood before the massive tactical display in his flagship's command center, watching red dots mark the positions of his invasion fleets. Each dot represented hundreds of ships and thousands of warriors from across the hegemony. The largest military force ever assembled was moving toward the human colonies, and yet something bothered him deeply. 3 weeks had passed since the Battle of New Geneva, and the reports kept getting worse. Not the casualty numbers, which were still acceptable by hegemony standards, but the patterns. The humans were not fighting like any enemy he had ever faced. "Report from the Tau Ceti offensive," his aide announced. Zexthal activated the holographic message. Fleet Commander Velenak, a veteran of dozens of conquest campaigns, appeared before him. The commander's usually confident demeanor was gone, replaced by something Zexthal had never seen in a hegemony officer: confusion. War leader. "The humans at Tau Ceti have abandoned their main settlement," Velenak reported. "When we arrived, we found empty buildings and no population. We assumed they had fled, but then they began attacking us from the asteroid belt. A simple ambush," Zexthal replied. "Deal with it." "Sir, it's not simple. They're using some kind of movement pattern we've never encountered. Small ships appear, attack, and disappear before we can respond. When we chase them, they lead us into prepared positions where larger forces are waiting. When we try to surround them, they scatter in all directions and reform somewhere else." Zexthal frowned. "How many ships are they using?" "That's the problem, sir. We estimate no more than 30 vessels, but they're causing damage like they were 300. They hit our supply ships, then our scouts, then our command vessels. Always the weakest point in our formation. Always when we're not expecting it. Then strengthen your formations. Keep your ships together. We tried that, sir. When we formed defensive clusters, they simply ignored us and attacked our mining operations on the outer planets. When we spread out to protect the miners, they hit our main fleet again." After the transmission ended, Zexthal called for his intelligence officer. Major Krendall was one of the finest tactical minds in the hegemony, with experience studying the warfare patterns of hundreds of conquered species. "What do you make of these human tactics?" Zexthal asked. Krendall consulted his datapad, his features troubled. "War leader, I've been analyzing all reports from the human conflicts. The patterns are ... unprecedented. At New Geneva they used defensive tactics that reminded me of ancient fortress warfare, but adapted for space combat. At Tau Ceti, they're employing hit-and-run strategies that seem designed to maximize psychological impact rather than material damage." "Psychological impact?" "Yes, sir. Traditional hit-and-run tactics focus on destroying enemy resources. But the humans seem more interested in making us feel uncertain, keeping us off balance. They attack in ways that make our superior numbers feel like a disadvantage." Zexthal studied the tactical displays. Red indicators showed hegemony fleets across human space, but many were marked with amber warnings indicating contact difficulties or unexpected resistance. "Sir," Krendall continued, "there's something else. We've intercepted human communications, and they keep referencing historical figures and battles from their past. Names like Hannibal, Napoleon, Shaka, Rommel. They seem to be studying their own military history and applying old strategies to space warfare." "Impossible," Zexthal said immediately. "Ancient tactics cannot work against modern technology." "With respect, sir, the results suggest otherwise. At the Kepler system, Admiral Kofi Asante used what humans call feint and retreat tactics. He appeared to flee from our forces, leading them through a series of star systems. Each time we thought we had cornered him, his ships would escape through routes we hadn't considered. By the time we realized what was happening, he had led our fleet far from any supply bases and attacked our weakest ships." Zexthal activated the display showing the Kepler campaign. The hegemony fleet's movements formed a twisted trail through space, following the human ships from system to system. It looked like a hunt, but somehow the prey had become the predator. "How many ships did we lose?" 47, sir." And Admiral Asante's force never numbered more than 12 vessels. 12 ships destroyed 47? Zexthal's voice rose. Dangerously. How is that possible? They never engaged us directly, Crandall explained. They hit our fuel ships, our food supplies, our ammunition transports. They forced us to spread our fleet to protect our logistics, then attack the scattered groups one at a time. Classic Mongol tactics, according to human historical records. Zexthel was beginning to understand why his fleet commanders sounded so frustrated in their reports. The humans weren't fighting a traditional space war. They were fighting like guerrilla armies from primitive planets but with spaceships. What about the Ross system? He asked. Crendall's expression grew even more troubled. Commander Yuki Sato is employing what humans call island hopping. Instead of defending every asteroid and moon in the system, she's fortifying only the most strategic positions. When we attack one position, she abandons it and moves to the next, forcing us to start over. Then we simply destroy all the positions at once. We tried that, sir. But the positions she chooses are always in places where destroying them damages something we need. Mining facilities, refueling stations, communication relays. She's making us destroy our own conquest infrastructure. Zexthel pulled up the raw system display. The human positions formed a chain across the system, each one controlling key resources or strategic passages. To eliminate them all would require destroying everything of value in the system. And the Alpha Centauri offensive? Captain Maria Santos is using what their records call feint and scatter tactics. Her ships appear to mass for an attack, drawing our forces into position to defend. Then at the last moment, they scatter in multiple directions and attack completely. Different targets? By the time we reposition our fleets, they've regrouped and are threatening somewhere else entirely. Zexthel closed his eyes and tried to control his growing anger. In 3 weeks of campaign, the hegemony had deployed more than 1,000 ships against human space. They should have conquered every human world by now. Instead, they were bogged down in dozens of small conflicts, bleeding ships and resources against an enemy that refused to fight fairly. "Sir," his communications officer interrupted, "we're receiving a transmission from Earth." The main screen, activated to show a human woman Zexthel didn't recognize. She appeared to be middle-aged with graying hair and intelligent eyes. Behind her, he could see what looked like a command center filled with displays and tactical equipment. "War Leader Zexthel," the woman said calmly. "I am Dr. Elena Vasquez, military historian and strategic advisor to the United Earth Defense Command. I wanted to thank you." "Thank me?" Zexthel was caught off guard. "For giving us the opportunity to test 10,000 years of human military theory in actual combat," Dr. Vasquez replied. "You see, we've spent our entire existence fighting each other. Every tactic you're encountering now, every strategy that's causing your forces trouble, we learned it by using it against ourselves." She gestured to the displays behind her, which showed star maps marked with battle indicators. "The tactics Admiral Asante is using against your Kepler fleet? We call them the Hannibal strategy, after a general who used the same approach to defeat a much larger Roman army over 2,000 years ago. Commander Sato's island-hopping campaign comes from our Pacific War of the 20th century. Captain Santos learned her scatter tactics from studying Mongol cavalry charges. Zexthel found his voice. "Ancient tactics cannot defeat modern fleets." "You're wrong," Dr. Vasquez said simply. "Tactics aren't about technology. They're about understanding how your enemy thinks, how they react, what they expect. You expect us to fight like the other species you've conquered, but we're not like them. We've never been unified long enough to develop predictable military doctrines. Instead, we've collected every possible way of fighting and learned from all of them." The screen split to show multiple battle feeds from across human space. Zexthel watched his fleet struggling against enemies that seemed to anticipate their every move. "Your forces are technologically superior," Dr. Vasquez continued, "but technology alone doesn't win wars. Knowledge wins wars, understanding wins wars, and we understand warfare in ways you've never had to learn." "We have conquered hundreds of species," Zexthel growled. "Species that fought the way you expected them to fight," Dr. Vasquez replied. Species that met your superior technology with inferior technology and lost predictably. But we're not meeting your technology with our technology. We're meeting your predictability with our unpredictability. The transmission ended, leaving Zexthel staring at a blank screen. Around him, his staff waited for orders, but he found himself unable to speak. For the first time in his long military career, he was beginning to understand that he might have made a terrible mistake. The hegemony had always won through overwhelming technological superiority. But what happened when the enemy refused to fight a technological war? "Sir?" his aide asked quietly. "Your orders?" Zexthel looked at the tactical displays showing his vast fleet scattered. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in the deepest archive of the Global Military History Center, surrounded by digital records that contained every battle, every strategy, and every tactical innovation in human history. Around her, teams of historians worked frantically at holographic displays, cross-referencing ancient battles with current space combat reports. The war had been raging for 18 months now, and humanity was running out of time. The hegemony had learned from their early mistakes. After the disasters at New Geneva, Tau Ceti, and Kepler, war leader Zexthel had changed his approach. Instead of using standard conquest fleets, he was now deploying massive armadas with overwhelming numbers. Where before he sent hundreds of ships, he now sent thousands. The human colonies were falling one by one under the sheer weight of alien metal. "Dr. Vasquez," her assistant called out, "we're getting reports from the Vega system. Admiral Chun is requesting immediate tactical consultation." Elena activated the communication link. Admiral Sarah Chun's face appeared on the screen, and Elena could see the exhaustion in her eyes. Behind the Admiral, the bridge of her flagship showed signs of recent battle damage. "Elena, we need options," Admiral Chun said without preamble. "The hegemony has deployed over 3,000 ships to Vega. We have 47 vessels left in fighting condition. Standard guerrilla tactics aren't working anymore. They're just throwing so many ships at us that it doesn't matter how cleverly we maneuver." Elena studied the tactical display that Chun transmitted. The hegemony fleet was arranged in a massive sphere around the Vega system, with multiple layers of ships at different distances. It was like trying to fight an entire ocean with a handful of boats. "What about the civilian population?" Elena asked. "We evacuated most of them to the asteroid mining stations," Chun replied. "But Zexthel isn't just targeting military assets anymore. He's destroying everything. Schools, hospitals, farms, research stations. He's trying to break our will to fight." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. This was exactly what she had been afraid of. The hegemony was adapting, becoming more ruthless, learning from their defeats. But as she stared at the tactical display, something clicked in her mind. "Admiral, what did you just say about the asteroid mining stations? The civilian refugees are hiding there. Why?" Elena's fingers flew across her datapad, pulling up historical records. "Because you just gave me an idea. Tell me, have you ever heard of the Siege of Leningrad?" 3 hours later, Elena was in a virtual conference with military commanders across human space. The holographic table showed the positions of every human fleet, every colony under attack, every desperate last stand being fought across dozens of star systems. Admiral Kofi Asante appeared tired but determined. His fleet had been running hit-and-run operations for months, but the hegemony's new massive deployments were making his tactics ineffective. Commander Yuki Sato looked worse, her face bearing a fresh scar from a recent battle where she had barely escaped with her ship intact. "The situation is critical," Elena began. "The hegemony has learned to counter our individual tactics by using overwhelming force, but they've also made a mistake. They've forgotten something important about human warfare." "What's that?" asked Captain Maria Santos, whose voice carried the strain of constant combat. "They've never studied our most desperate battles," Elena replied. She activated a display showing historical data. "Every tactic we've used so far comes from situations where we had some advantage. Terrain, mobility, surprise. But our greatest victories came when we had nothing left to lose." The display showed images from human history. The siege of Leningrad, where a city held out for nearly 3 years against impossible odds. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, where a few thousand fighters held off an entire army. The Battle of Thermopylae, where 300 Spartans delayed a massive Persian force. They're destroying our infrastructure, targeting our civilians, trying to break our spirit, Elena continued. But they don't understand that this is exactly when humans fight their hardest. When we have nowhere to run, when surrender means death anyway, when the only choice is to win or die trying. Admiral Chun leaned forward. What are you proposing? Operation Deep History, Elena said. We stop running. We stop trying to avoid their superior numbers. Instead, we do what humans have always done when faced with extinction. We make them pay a price they never expected to pay. She highlighted positions across the star map. Every human world, every colony, every station becomes a fortress. We use every defensive strategy humans have ever developed. Not just the clever ones, but the desperate ones. The brutal ones. The tactics that cost everything but sometimes, just sometimes, worked. Captain Santos studied the display. You're talking about siege warfare on a galactic scale. Exactly. The hegemony expects us to fight like a conventional military. But we're not a conventional military anymore. We're a species fighting for survival, and humans fighting for survival don't follow the rules. Over the next 2 weeks, Operation Deep History began to take shape. It wasn't a single strategy, but dozens of them, each adapted to local conditions and circumstances. On the world of New Sparta, Governor Jackson turned the entire planet into a maze of underground tunnels and hidden bunkers, using techniques learned from the tunnel systems of Vietnam and the underground resistance of World War II. The hegemony fleet arrived to find a planet that seemed empty, but every time they landed troops, they disappeared into hidden passages. Every building was booby-trapped, every road was mined. Every piece of equipment left behind was rigged to explode. The aliens found themselves fighting an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't locate, and couldn't defeat on the ice world of Hoth. Station Commander Lisa Park applied lessons from the siege of Stalingrad. She divided her forces into small, independent units that operated from prepared positions throughout the sprawling facility. When the hegemony forces attacked one section, defenders would retreat deeper into the complex, forcing the aliens to fight for every corridor, every room, every inch of ground. The hegemony troops found themselves in a nightmare of urban warfare they had never experienced. Humans would attack from behind, disappear into maintenance shafts, and emerge somewhere else entirely. Booby traps and ambush turned every advance into a deadly gamble. The aliens had superior weapons and armor, but in the close confines of the station, those advantages meant little. But it was Admiral Chun's defense of Vol 359 that truly showed the hegemony what they were facing. The system had no planets, only a collection of asteroid mining stations and space habitats. When the massive hegemony fleet arrived, they expected quick victory against the 40 human ships waiting for them. Instead, Admiral Chun had turned the entire system into a weapon. She had studied every naval battle in human history, from ancient galley warfare to submarine tactics, and adapted them for three-dimensional space combat. The asteroids became her islands. The space between them her ocean. The human ships didn't meet the hegemony fleet head-on. Instead, they used the asteroids for cover, appearing suddenly to attack and then disappearing again. They laid mines disguised as debris. They rigged asteroids to explode when enemy ships came too close. They even used some of the larger asteroids as Mogul fortresses, hiding inside them and emerging to attack the aliens from behind. The hegemony fleet had 3,000 ships, but they couldn't use them effectively. The asteroid field forced them to spread out, and Admiral Chun's forces attacked the scattered groups one at a time. When the aliens tried to form defensive formations, the humans used kamikaze tactics, ramming damaged ships into enemy vessels. To cause maximum damage, the battle lasted for 2 weeks. When it was over, the hegemony fleet had taken the system, but at a cost that shocked war leader Zextel. Over 800 ships destroyed, thousands of crew members dead. All to defeat 40 human vessels in a system with no strategic value, but the real shock came from the intelligence reports that followed. Across human space, similar battles were being fought. On every world, in every system, humans were fighting like cornered animals. They weren't trying to win quick victories anymore. They were trying to make the hegemony pay such a high price. For conquest, that victory would become meaningless. On Earth, Dr. Vasquez received reports from across the galaxy. The numbers were terrible. Humanity was losing every battle, every system, every world. But they were also achieving something unprecedented in the history of hegemony conquest. The casualty ratios are extraordinary, her assistant reported. For every human ship destroyed, the hegemony is losing between 15 and 20 vessels. For every human world conquered, they're suffering casualties in the hundreds of thousands. Elena nodded grimly. And their member species? How are they? Reacting to these losses? That's where it gets interesting, her assistant replied, pulling up intelligence intercepts. We're detecting communication between hegemony worlds expressing concern about the cost of this war. Some are questioning whether the conquest of humanity is worth the resources being expended. Elena felt a spark of hope. This was exactly what she had been hoping for. The hegemony had conquered the galaxy through overwhelming force, but they had never faced an enemy that refused to break. They had never fought a species that would rather die fighting than live in slavery. War leader Zexthel stood alone in his command chamber, staring at reports that made no sense to him. 2 years of warfare had reduced the mighty hegemony to a shadow of its former self. Half the member species had withdrawn their fleets, claiming the cost of conquest was too high. 3 entire worlds had declared independence, inspired by human broadcasts about freedom and resistance. The greatest military force in galactic history was falling apart because of one small primitive species that refused to die quietly. The final assault on Earth was his last chance to salvage victory from disaster. Every remaining hegemony ship, every loyal crew member, every weapon of war had been gathered for this ultimate battle. Over 4,000 vessels surrounded the human homeworld, more firepower than had ever been assembled in one place. Earth itself had been transformed into something Zexthel had never seen before. The planet bristled with defensive installations inspired by every fortification humans had ever built. Orbital stations hung in space like the gun towers of ancient castles. Asteroid fields had been moved into defensive positions, creating barriers reminiscent of medieval walls. Hidden weapon platforms waited in the shadows like the hidden bunkers of more recent wars. Dr. Elena Vasquez watched the approaching hegemony fleet from the command center buried deep beneath Geneva. Around her, the greatest military minds of humanity worked frantically at tactical displays, coordinating the defense of their home world. She had spent 3 years studying every aspect of this war, and now all of human history came down to this single moment. Admiral Chun reports the outer defenses are ready, her aide announced. Elena nodded, her eyes never leaving the main display. The hegemony fleet was moving into attack formation, exactly as she had predicted they would. Zexthel was desperate now, and desperate commanders made predictable choices. He would try to overwhelm Earth's defenses with a massive, coordinated assault. It was the logical thing to do. It was also exactly what humanity wanted him to do. Send the signal to all commands, Elena said quietly. Operation Canny is now active. Admiral Sarah Chun received the signal aboard her flagship, hidden among the asteroids of the outer defense ring. She had been studying the Battle of Canny for months, the ancient fight where Hannibal had destroyed a Roman army twice the size of his own force. The principle was simple: make your enemy think you're weaker than you are, let them attack where you want them to attack. Surround and destroy them. In space, with 3-dimensional movement and vast distances, the tactic seemed impossible. But humans had spent 2 years preparing for this moment, and they had learned to make the impossible merely difficult. All ships begin Phase 1. Admiral Chun ordered. The human fleet appeared to panic as the massive hegemony armada approached. Ships scattered in all directions, seemingly fleeing toward Earth in complete disorder. Some vessels appeared to suffer engine failures and drifted helplessly. Others broadcast surrender signals. The defensive formations broke apart as if the human commanders had lost their nerve. War leader Zexville watched the human retreat with grim satisfaction. Finally, they were acting like every other species he had conquered. Fear had broken their spirit, and now they would die like the primitive animals they were. All fleets advance, he ordered. Destroy everything that resists. Show no mercy. The hegemony fleet surged forward like a vast metal tide, thousands of ships moving in perfect formation toward the apparently defenseless Earth. They ignored the scattered human vessels, focusing on the planet itself and the major defensive installations that surrounded it. What Zexthel didn't know was that the scattered human ships were moving according to a carefully planned pattern. Ships that appeared to be fleeing in panic were actually taking up predetermined positions. Vessels that seemed to suffer engine failures were actually lying in wait at strategic locations. Even the surrender signals were part of the deception. Dr. Vasquez watched the hegemony fleet enter the killing zone and allowed herself a small smile. "They're committed now," she said to her staff. "Send Phase 2 to all commands." Across the solar system, human ships that had been hidden among asteroids, debris fields, and even inside abandoned space stations suddenly activated their engines. The scattered vessels that appeared to be fleeing turned and began moving into attack positions. Ships that had been broadcasting surrender signals powered up their weapons. The hegemony fleet found itself surrounded. Admiral Kofi Asante led the attack from the outer rim, his ships appearing from behind the moon with engines blazing. Commander Yuki Sato's forces emerged from the asteroid belt, having waited in complete silence for hours. Captain Maria Santos brought her squadron up from the dark side of Mars, where they had been hiding since the battle began, but the real surprise came from Admiral Chun herself. Her ships, which the hegemony thought were fleeing toward Earth, suddenly stopped and reversed course. Instead of running away from the alien fleet, they began charging directly into its center, War Leader. Zexthel stared at his tactical display in shock as red dots representing human ships appeared from every direction. The neat formation of his fleet was now surrounded by enemies who seemed to have materialized from empty space. "How is this possible?" he demanded of his tactical officer. "Sir, the human ships were never retreating," the officer replied, his voice filled with disbelief. "They were moving into position around us. Everything we saw was a deception." The battle that followed was unlike anything in the history of galactic warfare. The hegemony fleet was larger and more powerful, but they were trapped in the center of a three-dimensional cage. Human ships attacked from above and below from all sides, coordinating their assault with precision that spoke of months of planning. The aliens tried to break out, but every direction they turned led to more human ships. They tried to form defensive circles, but the humans had planned for that too. Ships that seemed damaged would suddenly reveal hidden weapons. Vessels that appeared to be retreating would turn and ram enemy ships at the last moment. Zexthel realized, with growing horror, that he was experiencing the same thing that had happened to armies throughout human history. Superior numbers and firepower meant nothing when your enemy controlled the battlefield. The humans had turned the entire solar system into a weapon, and his fleet was trapped inside it. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from Earth," his communications officer announced. Dr. Elena Vasquez appeared on the main screen, but she was no longer the calm historian who had spoken to him months before. Now she looked like what she truly was, a warrior from a species that had spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of war. "War Leader Zexthel," she said, her voice carrying across the vacuum of space to every ship in both fleets. "You declared war on a species that has been fighting for its entire existence. You studied our technology and counted our ships, but you never studied our history." The display behind her showed images from the battle raging around them. Hegemony ships burning, alien crews abandoning damaged vessels, the mighty armada that was supposed to conquer Earth being systematically destroyed. "This is canny," Dr. Vasquez continued. A battle fought over 2,000 years ago where a smaller army destroyed a larger one through superior strategy. We have used this same tactic against ourselves dozens of times throughout our history. We know every way it can succeed and every way it can fail. Zexthel found his voice. You cannot defeat the entire hegemony. Even if you destroy this fleet, others will come. No, they won't, Dr. Vasquez replied calmly. Because you made a critical error. You forgot that empires built on fear fall apart. When that fear is broken. For 2 years, we've been broadcasting to every world in the hegemony. We've shown them what resistance looks like. We've reminded them that freedom is worth fighting for. As if to prove her point, new contacts appeared on Zexthel's tactical display. Ships were arriving from across the galaxy, but they weren't hegemony reinforcements. They were vessels from species that had been conquered centuries ago, now flying alongside human ships. The Velkan Republic has remembered how to fight, Dr. Vasquez said as alien ships joined the battle against the hegemony fleet. The Theron clans have rejected your rule. The Zephyr Collective has declared independence. Your empire is crumbling, war leader, and it's crumbling because you forgot the most important lesson of military history. What lesson? Zexthel asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. That you can conquer a people, but you cannot conquer their desire to be free. You can destroy their ships and occupy their worlds, but you cannot kill their dreams of independence. And sooner or later those dreams become action. The battle continued for 6 more hours, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The hegemony fleet, trapped in the center of the human formation, was systematically destroyed. Some ships tried to surrender, others attempted desperate breakout attacks. But the humans had planned for every possibility. When it was over, fewer than 300 of the original 4,000 hegemony ships remained functional. Zexthel's flagship was among them, but only because Admiral Chun had deliberately spared it. The transmission from Earth came one final time. Dr. Vasquez appeared.